June 22, 1941. 3:15 hours. The banks of the Bug River, occupied Poland. The air is heavy with the scent of damp earth and diesel exhaust. Behind a screen of dense brush, Major Friedrich Wilhelm von Mellenthin checks his watch. The ticking is a rhythmic hammer against the silence of the pre-dawn forest. Around him, the 4th Panzer Division is a coiled spring. Thousands of men in field gray, huddled in the bellies of Panzer III and IV tanks, their breath fogging in the chill morning air. For months, they had been told they were training for the invasion of England. But the compass needles pointed east. Suddenly, the world tears open. A thunderous roar shatters the stillness as over 3,000 German artillery pieces ignite simultaneously along a frontier stretching 1,800 miles. The horizon to the east, once a deep indigo, bleeds into a jagged line of orange and crimson. The ground beneath Mellenthin's boots trembles. This is the opening chord of Unternehmen Barbarossa, Operation Barbarossa. Panzers march. The engines roar to life, a mechanical cacophony that drowns out the distant screams of shells. As the first light of dawn touches the grain fields, the German war machine surges forward. It is a spectacle of terrifying efficiency. The Luftwaffe's Ju-87 Stukas screech overhead, diving like birds of prey toward Soviet airfields where hundreds of Red Air Force planes sit wingtip to wingtip, never to leave the ground. Across the river, the Soviet frontier guards are paralyzed. Many are literally asleep in their barracks when the ceiling collapses under German high explosives. Reports filter back to Moscow in frantic, disjointed bursts. "We are being fired upon. What shall we do?" The response from the Kremlin is a chilling bureaucratic silence. Joseph Stalin, the man who had purged his own officer corps and signed a non-aggression pact with Hitler, refuses to believe the provocation is a full-scale war. By noon, the reality is undeniable. 3 massive army groups, North, Center, and South, are slicing through the Soviet borders. You see the dust clouds rising from the tracks of Army Group Center, commanded by Fedor von Bock. Their objective is the heart, Moscow. The Blitzkrieg, perfected in the lowlands of France, is now being unleashed on a continental scale. The German soldiers are confident, arrogant even. They have crushed Poland in weeks and humiliated the French in a month. They see the Russian Untermenschen as a disorganized rabble. As Mellenthin's panzer rolls past burning Soviet trucks and columns of dazed, surrendering prisoners, the mood is almost celebratory. They believe they will be home before the leaves fall. But as the sun climbs higher, the sheer scale of the landscape begins to dawn on the invaders. The roads are not the paved arteries of Western Europe. They are ribbons of dirt and sand that swallow the wheels of supply trucks. And beyond the first line of defense, the vast emerald sea of the Russian steppe stretches toward an infinite horizon. The giant has been struck, and though it bleeds, it is beginning to wake. July 9th, 1941, 1400 hours, the outskirts of Minsk, Belarusian SSR. Previous section text. Continues seamlessly from where this left off. The heat is stifling, a thick blanket of humidity mixed with the acrid stench of cordite and burning rubber. Sergeant Gerhard Mertens of the 7th Panzer Division wipes a layer of grime from his goggles, peering through the vision slit of his Panzer 38T. Outside, the white Russian landscape is a graveyard of Soviet ambition. The Blitzkrieg has reached its first terrifying crescendo. Under the brilliant, indifferent sun, the German pincers have snapped shut. General Heinz Guderian's 2nd Panzer Group and Hermann Hoth's 3rd Panzer Group have met east of Minsk encircling the Soviet 3rd, 10th, and 13th armies. Within this kessel, this cauldron, nearly 300,000 Red Army soldiers are trapped. Target, 10 o'clock, anti-tank gun. Merton screams over the internal intercom. The turret swivels with a mechanical whine. A Soviet 45mm anti-tank gun, hidden in a field of towering sunflowers, flashes. A shell whistles past the Panzer's cupola, missing by inches. Before the Soviet crew can reload, the German 37mm cannon barks. The sunflower field erupts in a fountain of dirt and shattered wood. It is a scene repeated 1,000 times across the pocket. The Soviet resistance is frantic, disorganized, but unexpectedly fierce. Unlike the French, who often surrendered when outflanked, these Ivan soldiers fight with a desperate, primal ferocity, often defending a single trench until the last man is crushed under tank treads. Despite the mounting prisoner counts, a shadow of unease begins to creep into the German high command. The distances are deceptive. On the map, the progress is staggering, hundreds of miles covered in weeks. But on the ground, the friction of war is grinding the machinery down. The fine silt of the Russian tracks, known as pils, is so invasive, it chokes the air filters of the Panzers and turns the oil in the engines into a gritty paste. In Moscow, the silence from the Kremlin has finally broken. On July 3rd, Stalin addressed the nation over the radio, his voice shaking, the sound of a glass clinking against his teeth audible. He didn't call for a defense of communism. He called for a great patriotic war. He ordered a scorched earth policy. As Mertens and his crew push further east, they find the wells poisoned, the grain stores burned, and the bridges blown. The German infantry, the Lancers, are marching 30 miles a day in the wake of the tanks, their jackboots disintegrating on the flinty roads. They pass through villages where the inhabitants initially greeted them with bread and salt, hoping for liberation from Stalinist terror, only to see the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile killing squads, following close behind the front lines. The war is stripping away its mask of civilized conflict and revealing a genocidal core. By mid-July, the Smolensk pocket begins to form, a gateway to Moscow. But the Red Army is throwing fresh divisions into the fray, units the German intelligence, the Fremde Heere Ost, didn't even know existed. For every Soviet division destroyed, 2 more seem to rise from the earth. The easy victory is evaporating into a haze of dust and blood. Gerhard Mertens looks at the map pinned to his turret wall. The distance to Moscow still looks like an eternity, and the Russian summer is already beginning to wane. October 7th, 1941, 10 o'clock hours, the highway toward Vyazma, Soviet Union. Previous section text. Continue seamlessly from where this left off. The sky is the color of a bruised plum, sagging low over the horizon. Corporal Hans Dietrich Rehmer of the 35th Infantry Regiment stands knee-deep in a slurry that was, only 48 hours ago, a solid road. The first autumn rains have arrived, and with them, the dreaded Rasputitsa, the quagmire season. Under the weight of thousands of supply trucks and the heavy wheels of the LEF H-18 howitzers, the Russian soil has dissolved into a viscous, chocolate-colored glue. It is a physical entity, a relentless enemy that clings to boots, clogs the axles of wagons, and sucks the very strength from a man's bones. Remecher watches as a team of 12 horses, on their ribs straining against their harnesses, collapses in the muck trying to pull a single ammunition cart. They will likely be shot and eaten by morning. Despite the mud, the German High Command is ecstatic. Operation Typhoon, the final thrust to capture Moscow, has begun. in the dual pockets of Vyazma and Bryansk, the Wehrmacht has just achieved its greatest tactical victory of the war. Over 600,000 Soviet soldiers have been encircled. It is a military disaster of such proportions that it should have ended the war. On paper, the Red Army has ceased to exist. "Keep pushing," a sergeant bellows, his voice hoarse from the cold. "Stalin is packing his bags. Moscow is only 2 weeks away." But Remmer looks at the faces of the men around him. They are no longer the polished conquerors of June. Their uniforms are tattered, and their eyes sunken with a 1,000-yard stare of the Eastern Front. The supply lines are snapping. Because the German rail gauge is different from the Soviet tracks, every ton of fuel and food must be painstakingly transferred at the border. Now, with the roads turned to soup, the front-line troops are surviving on horse meat and hardtack. Across the lines, the mood is changing. The panic of the summer has hardened into a cold, lethal resolve. In Moscow, workers, women, and teenagers are digging hundreds of miles of anti-tank trenches in the freezing slush. Stalin has summoned General Georgy Zhukov from the Leningrad front. More importantly, Soviet intelligence has confirmed that Japan will not attack from the east. Consequently, the Siberians, well-equipped, the winter-hardened divisions from the Soviet Far East, are being loaded onto trains headed for the capital. As night falls, the temperature drops below freezing for the first time. The mud begins to harden into jagged ruts that tear at the soldiers' feet. For a brief moment, the German commanders rejoice. The ground is firm enough for the panzers to move again. But the cold brings a new terror. Remmer notices that the engine oil in their trucks is beginning to thicken like molasses. They have no winter clothing, no heavy coats, no felt boots, no white camouflage. The High Command, blinded by their own hubris, never issued them, certain that the war would be won before the first frost. The spires of the Kremlin are almost within sight of the German forward patrols. But the wind blowing off the steppes carries the scent of ice and iron. On the Russian winter, the most formidable ally of the Red Army has arrived. December 2nd, 1941, 9 o'clock hours. Khimki, 11 miles from the Kremlin. Previous section text continues seamlessly from where this left off. The air is no longer just cold, it is a physical weight, a crystalline blade that slices into the lungs with every breath. Lieutenant Klaus Hübner of the 258th Infantry Division raises his binoculars, his fingers numb despite the woolen rags wrapped around them. Through the shimmering haze of a light snowfall, he sees it. The golden glint of the Kremlin's domes and the dark, skeletal shapes of Moscow's industrial chimneys. A motorcycle scout team from the 62nd Pioneer Battalion has reached the tram terminus at Khimki. They are so close they can see the panicked civilian evacuation. This is the high water mark of the Third Reich. The panzers, why aren't they moving? Hübner rasps. The answer lies in the thermometer, which has plummeted to minus 35 degrees Celsius. The German army is literally freezing in place. The panzers, once the spearhead of the world's most advanced military, are now hulking tombs of cold steel. To start the engines, crews must light small fires beneath the chassis to melt the frozen lubricants, a dangerous gamble that often ends in explosions. Machine guns jam as the firing pins snap in the brittle air. Hübner looks at his platoon. The men are ghosts. They suffer from third-degree frostbite. Toes turn black and drop off inside boots. Eyelids freeze shut. Without white winter parkas, their dark field-gray uniforms stand out like targets against the blinding white snow, making them easy prey for Soviet snipers. While the Germans starve and freeze, RECON, the Soviet Union has begun its most desperate gamble. On November 7th, Stalin held the traditional October Revolution parade in Red Square. The soldiers didn't march to barracks. They marched directly from the parade ground to the front lines, only kilometers away. Now, those Siberian divisions Hübner feared have arrived. Suddenly, the eerie silence of the snow-covered forest is shattered. It isn't the erratic fire of a retreating foe, but the rhythmic, terrifying roar of the Katyusha rocket launchers, the Stalin organs. Screaming trails of fire arch across the gray sky, slamming into the German lines and turning the frozen earth into a furnace of jagged shrapnel. Then comes the sound that haunts Hübner's dreams, the high-pitched, guttural roar of thousands of voices. Ura! 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 Out of the tree line emerge the T-34 tanks. Unlike the narrow-tracked German Panzers that are currently bellied in the snow, the T-34s boast wide tracks that allow them to glide over the drifts like predators. Behind them, Soviet infantry clad in thick, quilted Telegreka jackets and white felt Valenki boots charge forward on skis. Hübner screams for his men to fix bayonets, but the counteroffensive is a tidal wave. General Zhukov has unleashed his reserves. For the first time since 1939, the Wehrmacht is not just being stopped, it is being pushed back. The myth of German invincibility is shattering in the sub-zero winds of the Moscow suburbs. The retreat begins. It is a slow, agonizing crawl through the snow, leaving behind thousands of vehicles, abandoned guns, and the frozen corpses of men who believed the war would be over by Christmas. The Blitzkrieg is dead. The war of attrition has begun. January 20th, 1942, 16:30 hours. A frozen tree line near Zhev, Soviet Union. Previous section text. Continue seamlessly from where this left off. The sun is a pale, heatless coin, sinking rapidly behind the skeletal birches. For Oberleutnant Karl-Heinz Stolze of the 9th Army, the landscape has become a monochromatic nightmare of white and gray. The sweeping maneuvers of the summer are a distant, bitter memory. Now, the war is measured in meters, fought over blackened village ruins and nameless ravines. The Soviet winter counteroffensive has not just pushed the Germans back, it has fractured their front into a series of isolated hedgehogs, fortified strongpoints where German units cling to survival. The Soviet High Command, emboldened by the victory at Moscow, is now attempting a massive double envelopment to destroy Army Group Center entirely. Sir, the second company is down to 20 effective men. A runner wheezes, his face a mask of frost-damaged skin and filth. And the IVs are out of fuel. They're using them as static pillboxes now. Stolz nods grimly. The logistics, the Achilles heel of Barbarossa, have finally buckled. The German supply lines, stretched over 1,000 miles of hostile snow-choked territory, are being shredded by partisan units operating in the vast forests behind them. Every bullet, every loaf of sawdust-filled bread, and every drop of precious antifreeze must survive a gauntlet of ambushes and sub-zero temperatures. As the sky turns to a deep, freezing violet, the horizon begins to pulse with the rhythmic crump of heavy Soviet mortars. And this is the new reality of the Eastern Front. A war of annihilation. The ideological nature of the conflict, dictated by Hitler's Commissar order, has ensured that there is no room for surrender. The Soviet soldiers, knowing that captivity often means death by starvation or execution, fight with a suicidal tenacity that baffles the German officers. Looking back at the statistics, the failure of the initial plan is stark. Operation Barbarossa was predicated on the decisive battle theory, the idea that the Soviet Union would collapse if its frontier armies were destroyed. But the Germans have discovered that the USSR is not a house of cards. It is an ocean. They have marched into the depths, and the water is closing over their heads. By the end of January, the Wehrmacht has suffered over 900,000 casualties. The veteran NCOs and officers who crossed the Bug River in June are largely gone, replaced by half-trained recruits who have never seen a winter, let alone a Russian one. Hitler, having dismissed his top generals in a fit of rage, has taken personal command of the army, issuing stand-fast orders that prevent tactical retreats, leading to further senseless slaughter. The sleeping giant is no longer just awake, it is fully mobilized. Behind the Ural Mountains, entire factories moved by rail are now churning out T-34 tanks and IL-2 Sturmovik ground attack planes at a rate the German industry cannot hope to match. Stolze pulls his tattered greatcoat tighter. He realizes now that the war of 1941 didn't end in victory. It merely transformed into a long, agonizing death struggle. Barbarossa has failed in its primary objective, and the Soviet Union still stands. And for the first time, the men in field gray begin to look west, wondering if they will ever see the Rhine again.